Hello. I am William Kirk McNulty, and I have been a Mason for 50 years. I'm very appreciative of the Grand Lodge of Indiana for asking me to participate in the worldwide exemplification of Freemasonry. They have asked me to talk about the philosophical background for Masonic symbolism. I have written 3 books on this subject, and I am pleased to condense them here for this presentation. Actually, the symbolic structure of Freemasonry evolved from 1717 to 1813, the start of the Grand Lodge of England. In this presentation, we will use the symbolic structure as the use of the United Grand Lodge of England, because it is the most comprehensive of Masonic symbolism, and it will cover all the symbols. In plain fact, almost every Grand Lodge has a slightly different symbolic structure. The 3 degrees of Masonry take place in King Solomon's temple. The first degree takes place on the ground floor. The second degree takes place in the middle chamber, and the third degree takes place on King Solomon's porch, which is the porchway entrance to the Holy of Holies. Why should such a collection of architectural sites imply any philosophical background? Well, if you look at this from the point of view of the statement in the Great Light that says, "Know ye not that ye are the temple," then the 3 positions in the temple refer to 3 aspects of you, each individual human being. The 3 degrees describe a journey for the individual who participates in them. It is, in fact, a journey within one's consciousness. The Masonic degrees simply describe this interior journey. I must tell you that a Mason wanting to take this journey must do it by himself, in his own way, and in the context of his own religious experience. Freemasonry confers the degrees. Freemasonry does not confer elevated levels of consciousness. Let us start with a very brief historical overview of Freemasonry. Origin. The plain truth is that no one knows. There are many theories, and there is no real data. The first evidence is casual lodges meeting in Britain in the mid to late 1600s to make Masons. We call them casual lodges because there was no formal Masonic organization. The first formal organization was 1717, when the first Grand Lodge was formed in London. This period is the end of the Renaissance, and my hypothesis is that Freemasonry is a codification of the philosophical essence of the Renaissance. Let's look at the Renaissance and its unique nature. In the Middle Ages, the whole purpose of academic undertaking was to reconcile classical philosophy with the Christian doctrines. The fundamental purpose of life was to ensure our salvation of the individual in heaven after death. The Renaissance is a word which means rebirth, and it was devised by scholars in Florence, Italy, who were seeking a rebirth of the classical philosophy. While still seeking heaven in the afterlife, they were of the belief that it was possible for a human being to experience the divine presence here and now while he was alive. In classical times, philosophical construction was communicated in terms of what we call Greek myths. In the Renaissance, philosophy was Christian in nature, with an influence from the Hermetica and the Kabbalah. Francis Amelia Yates has called the philosophical essence of the Renaissance the Hermetic Kabbalistic tradition. And we ought to take a moment and think about Francis Yates, because she has brought the subject of Hermetica and Kabbalah into this presentation. Francis Amelia Yates was a reader of history at the University of London. That is an English academic rank comparable to Associate Professor of History. And she worked throughout the 1900s. She was very well received, and so well received, in fact, that at the end of her career, she was made a Dame of the British Empire, feminine equivalent of Knight of the British Empire. Her field was the history of thought. Now, she was particularly interested in the Renaissance and the thought of the Renaissance, and that she found the Hermetic Kabbalistic tradition, as she called it, to be at the center of that philosophy. With that in mind, let us look and see what the Hermetica and the Kabbalah say that might be of influence to Freemasonry. The Hermetica evolved in Alexandria, Egypt, in the 2nd century. It was a body of Egyptian thought influenced by Christianity and Hellenized Judaism, and it was translated when the doctrine, the folk from Florence purchased the documents, and was translated by Marsilio Ficino in 1471. Kabbalah is the mystical tradition of Judaism, and it, as the Jews were expelled from Spain by the Christian reconquest of Spain in the late 1400s, a lot of Kabbalistic material found its way to Florence, where it was translated by Pico della Mirandola. The basic principles of the Renaissance philosophy are these, the basic metaphysical principles. The first, Neoplatonism. Let me define Neoplatonism. First, God does not exist. That seems a strange thing for a Mason to say, since Masons must believe in God. But we know what existence is, and whatever God is, it's too big to stuff into an idea we can hold in our heads. God is beyond existence. And for purposes of its own, God wills itself into existence as all that is. This is kind of useful because a creator is separate from his creation. And that sort of tends to place a limitation on the deity, whereas the idea of Neoplatonism, where God is all things, is more comforting. Here's a quote from the Hermetica. For God contains all things, and there is nothing that is not in God, and there is nothing which God is not. Nay, I would rather say not that God contains all things, but to speak the full truth, God is all things. Now, the next belief was that the universe was at two levels. The macrocosm, which was the whole universal picture, and the microcosm, which was mankind. Both were made according to the same set of rules, and the same laws applied to both of them. In the macrocosm and the microcosm, there are four levels: the physical level, the celestial level, the supercelestial level, and the divine. Those terms are thought up while the earth was thought to be the center of the universe. I would prefer to say today the physical level, the psychological level, the spiritual level, and the divine. The other principle is that opposites at each level are held in balance. Now, here is a diagram from the Kabbalah. It is a diagram of enormous complexity. It can be used to represent any open system. We are going to simply, I'm going to touch on it very briefly. But first of all, notice on the right-hand column, called the column of mercy, all the activity in the universe are to be found there. The column of severity on the left contains all the passive, restraining, disciplinary principles. The column of consciousness in the center holds these two in balance. And there are, as you see, large circles drawn around it for the physical, the psychological, the spiritual, and the circle of divinity. I have left the circle of divinity open because there is no limit. The last principle is the idea of mystical ascent. Now, that really means that none of this stuff can be learned from reading books or listening to lectures. You really have to experience it in order to know what's happening. And that means a journey from the physical world through the psychological to the spiritual world and experiencing the divine presence. That is called the mystical ascent or the interior journey. Now, this is a first-degree tracing board. And what I will do is discuss the symbolic structure on the tracing board and how it relates to the principles of the Renaissance. Now, first, so that we can see how principles of the Renaissance were incorporated into Freemasonry. The first thing to look at is the ornaments of the lodge. They are the blazing star and glory, the checkered pavement, and the tessellated border. The blazing star and glory is the star in the center of the tracing board, at the top of the ladder. And it is not what a contemporary astronomer would call a stellar object. Stellar objects are to be seen up around the moon in the upper right-hand corner. The blazing star and glory is a straightforward heraldic representation of the deity. It is a representation of the deity at the moment that it wills itself into existence. The checkered pavement is at the bottom of the picture, and it is composed of squares. The squares are paired opposites, black and white, easy and difficult, happy and sad. But the squares are not the image. The squares fit together with exact nicety to form the checkered pavement, which is shown here without limit. The checkered pavement represents the deity as it is seen and understood by people at the ordinary level of consciousness. The tessellated border, in this case, is binding the whole image into, is framing the whole image. And the tassels at the corner represent the influence of deity flowing through the world. Paired opposites are to be found throughout the entire picture. From the black and white squares on the checkered pavement to the sun and moon at the top, which are classical representations of male and female. But here, in the middle of the picture, a new idea is introduced. There are three columns: the very, very plain Doric column, the very elaborate Corinthian column, and between them the Ionic column, which is not as plain as the Doric and not as elaborate as the Corinthian. Now, these are called in Freemasonry, the Ionic column is the column of wisdom. The Doric column is the column of strength, and the Corinthian column is the column of beauty. And and wisdom is between strength and beauty, and indeed, wisdom holds strength and beauty in balance. The idea of three columns being held in balance is there. And then there are four levels: the checkered pavement, the center of the picture which holds most of the symbols, and the heavens, and then divinity. That is the macrocosm. Where is the microcosm? Well, we have not yet spoken of Jacob's ladder, and we will speak of it together with the point within a circle bounded by two parallel lines, which you can see on the front of the pedestal. Let me show you another image here. This is the frontispiece for Masonic miscellanies, and it shows the same picture. The Jacob's ladder and the point within a circle bounded by two parallel lines are very frequently put together in Masonic symbolism. I think it's important that they be considered together. Now, the two parallel lines are considered to be paired opposites. They were originally considered to be the holy Saints John. The Baptists stay as midsummer, the Evangelists stay as midwinter, and if you read their activities in the Great Light, the Bible, they are quite different personalities. In England, as the symbolic structure was de-Christianized, they became Moses and Solomon. Moses the prophet and Solomon the lawgiver. Those are two opposite personalities. Between them is Jacob's ladder. And as we saw in the frontispiece of Masonic miscellanies, there are three steps on Jacob's ladder: faith, hope, and charity. Here, faith is represented by the hand pointing at the Bible on the pedestal, the anchor of hope halfway up the ladder, the chalice of charity, which is usually shown at the top of the ladder, is in fact now shown by this artist down at the bottom of the ladder, because charity takes place in the ordinary world. However, that is the third step, and the fourth step is divinity. Both the macrocosm and the microcosm are emerging from divinity. We have not spoken yet of the mystical ascent. Let us think about the mystical ascent in terms of this quotation from Emulation Working of the United Grand Lodge of England. This doctrine: did you ever travel? My forefathers did. Where did they travel? Due east and west. What was the object of their travels? They traveled east in search of instruction, and west to propagate the knowledge they had gained. Now, if we turn back to the drawing of the tracing board, think of someone standing in front of that pedestal. Now look at the border around the board and notice that the points of the compass, north is on the left-hand border, south is on the right-hand border, east is at the top, and west is at the bottom. If the man standing at the pedestal was going to travel east, he would be traveling up Jacob's ladder, which is the mystical ascent. As we have seen, the 3 degrees of Masonry take place within King Solomon's temple, and we are the temple. 3 degrees of Masonry are in fact a model of the mystical ascent. The journey starts with the 1st degree on the ground floor of the temple. The first thing the candidate does is he leaves behind the things of this world. For many candidates, for many Masons watching, they won't have thought they did this thing. But if you think, what happens is when a candidate is prepared for the 1st degree, he divests himself of all minerals and metals. In the 1600s, early 1700s, when Masonry started, all money was in coins, and most gentlemen carried swords. So if you left behind all minerals and metals, you left behind the things of this world. The working tools of the 1st degree are tools of action. They are the gavel, the chisel, and the 24-inch gauge. The gavel is obviously an instrument of force. Chisel is described in the English Masonry as a symbol of education, and the 24-inch gauge refers not simply to the measurement of lengths, but also the measurement of time, referring to the 24 hours of the day. So you have a gavel of passion, a chisel of analysis, and the 24-inch gauge tells you how much of each and when. The cardinal virtues in Freemasonry provide you with a strong and stable life. They are prudence, temperance, fortitude, and justice. When you practice those virtues, you will find that you are developing a stable, well-respected life in the world. The next thing about the apprentice, the 1st degree of Masonry teaches, is secrecy. Now I have to tell you that there are no Masonic secrets. There have been an abundance of apostate Masons, and everything which I am obligated to hold secret is available to the general public on anti-Masonic websites. And then the question is, why are we so obligated to secrecy? And the answer is, secrecy is necessary for the interior ascent, for the mystical ascent. In the interior journey, you learn many things about yourself. These are important personal things, and they are important. The principle is, do not share valuable personal information with those who cannot understand it. This is not a new idea. About 2,000 years ago, the most important teacher in the history of Western civilization, speaking in a different cultural idiom, said, "Neither cast ye your pearls before swine." The same principle. Do not share valuable material, personal material, with those who cannot understand it. That is the nature of secrecy. Practicing the lessons learned on the ground floor gives one a firm and stable situation in the world. And will give one a well-respected attitude in society. This leads the individual to the individuation of the self, as the term is known in Jungian psychology. When one then becomes an individual that lives his own life, an independent, freestanding, personally motivated individual. Having achieved that, one is ready to start climbing the ladder. That is the activity of the second degree. This is a picture of the second degree tracing board. It will seem strange when I say that this is in fact a detailed drawing of the first degree tracing board, but it is in fact a detailed drawing of the point within a line, a point within a circle bounded within two parallel lines, and below Jacob's ladder. This is a picture of the temple, and you are the temple, so of course it's a picture of you. This is the door of the temple, and there are two columns here. These columns are two opposite verticals. They are verticals because columns are, and they are opposites because they are topped by the celestial and terrestrial spheres. They're also said to have been cast in brass and be hollow, to be the archives of Masonry. If they are the archives of Masonry and you are the temple, then they are in fact you're the memory of the individual pictured here. Between them is the winding staircase, which has replaced Jacob's ladder. And there are 4 levels: the ground floor, the middle chamber, this balcony toward the top of the picture, and the picture of the sun is certainly a representation of the deity, because the sun never shines inside buildings. So there we are looking at a representation of us about to climb the winding stairs, and the stairs are guarded at the bottom by the junior warden. By the river outside, there is an ear of corn by a fall of water. The first thing you noticed is that the ear of corn says this is a natural process. This climbing of the ladder is a natural process. The second thing is the junior warden, the self, guards the bottom of the stairs. You cannot climb these stairs without first having experienced the individuation of the self. The junior warden asks for a password. Now this password has a very complicated story involved with it, and I shall not mention the story because I don't want to reveal the password, but it does teach 2 things. The first is, before you undertake to climb the stairs, you must have completed the proper preparation. And the proper preparation is the material in the first degree. The second lesson is, before you undertake this journey, you must have the proper motive. The proper motive for entering and climbing the staircase is experiencing the divine presence. And the password clue gives us that clue. Climbing the stairs is a journey in consciousness. It is not usually seen as a difficult adventure, but as I mentioned, the archives of Masonry become your memory, and you get memories from these archives as you climb the stairs. Most of these memories are perfectly good. What you do is our memories tend to cause us to inhibit us or to compel us. And what we do as you climb the stairs is take these memories and understand them and drain the energy out of them. And then they no longer compel or inhibit. And you continue to become more and more freestanding. Sometimes the memories can be quite painful. Sharing such a experience can be helpful, and you can share it with another brother Mason, which is another of the reasons for keeping secrets. But I should quote to you part of the obligation from the United Grand Lodge of England. I shall keep the secrets of a brother Master Mason as my own, when communicated to me as such. Murder, treason, and all violations of the laws of God and the ordinances of the realm, at all times most particularly accepted. This obligation is printed in plain text in the English workings, so I can tell you that. But it's a reason for keeping secrets. If someone shares a difficult problem, you can do it. No one should be talked into doing this ascent. It's something he must do for himself. He should not be talked into it, and that's a reason why individuals must ask to be made a Mason. The middle chamber is a symbol of one's soul. At least that is my view of the symbolic structure. And that is the seat of one's morality. The working tools here in the second degree are tools of testing. The plumb rule, the level, and the square. Each of these tests against an absolute criterion. Vertical, level, and square. Two of them are opposite, and the third defines the relationship between the two. That sounds pretty much like a definition of a system of morality. And in fact, I think the plumb rule, the vertical line, defines all the things which you may do, the things for which you have license to do. The level describes all the disciplines and restraints which you apply upon yourself. And the square describes the relationship between these two, which, again, is a device which keeps two opposites in balance. The history says that the operative Masonic lodges contained perfect ashlars, that is to say, stones that were square, ready to be installed in the building. And there was always one in the lodge for the experienced craftsman to try his tools on. Now it seems to me, in the operative days, the square, the level, and the plumb rule were made of wood. And as they were used on stones, they got abraded. And the perfect ashlar was used to recalibrate them. That makes the perfect ashlar sound to me like one's conscience. We are told that the fellow craft masons went to the middle chamber to receive their wages. Their wages were appropriate and fair, and every brother was entitled to what is received. This is a good thing, but it is also a basis for individual freedom. Middle chamber is a place of contemplation. What is it that you contemplate? I suggest that one contemplates the letter G, which is displayed in every second degree lodge. What does the letter G symbolize? This is a question. The ritual says it symbolizes geometry, the regular progression of science, from a point to a line, from a line to a superficie, from a superficie to a solid. I suggest that the regular progression of science refers to Neoplatonism. Let's look at the early references to the regular progression of science. The earliest quote I could find was from 1726. It says, "A foundation laid in virtue by the strictest geometrical rules is a point of such moment that each line describes its strength and stability, and a mason must have a very superficial and far from solid judgment who can doubt that its duration to the end of all things." Well, it doesn't tell us much, but the fact that it's 1726 suggests that the letter G is a very early symbol. The letter G was discussed next in 1730 by Samuel Pritchard, who wrote Masonry Dissected, which was an anti-Masonic publication. The next reference was 1730-31 by an anonymous author of The Defense of Masonry. This is a photocopy of an actual page from The Defense of Masonry. It doesn't say much. It simply says that point, line, superficie, solid, and was considered to be very important. But the interesting thing is the marginal note, which says, "Vide Proclus in Euclid." See Proclus in Euclid. Now, we all know who Euclid was, the father of geometry. Proclus was a Greek philosopher who was a serious Neoplatonist. There was only one copy of Euclid in translation, one English language translation in 1713. That was Billingsley's translation, and happily at the Library of American University I was able to find a copy of that and see exactly what this note refers to. What Proclus says is, if a point moves, it generates a line. If a line moves in a direction not parallel to itself, it generates a superficie or a plane. If the superficie moves in a direction not parallel to itself, it generates a solid. Those were not the words quoted, but that's essentially what he says. Now, since Proclus was a serious Neoplatonist, I thought it easy to say that this is a representation of Neoplatonism, especially since the stuff of the point is the fabric of the line, and the stuff of the line is the fabric of the superficie, and the stuff of the superficie is the fabric of the solid. I talked to a couple of philosophy professors, but the plain fact is that Proclus never mentioned Neoplatonism in any of his writings. I did notice, however, that in Moorish Spain there was an author named Isaac ibn Latif, a philosopher. He was a Kabbalist. And he uses in his writings the notion of point, line, superficie, solid to describe the emergence of the world from divinity, spirit, soul, and physical world. That is the letter G. Contemplations of the letter G in the middle chamber of our soul will eventually lead us to King Solomon's porch, the porchway entrance to the Holy of Holies in the temple that we are. This is the third degree tracing board. And you can see King Solomon's porch, the checkered pavement at the entrance, and someone on King Solomon's porch can see into the Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies is the place in the temple where the deity resides. each Master Mason has been a ritual representation of this place, wearing the jewel of the junior warden. There is, however, a problem with this. We are operating at the level of the self. Now the deity is without limit. The self cannot become aware of the deity and continue to exist. The self dies. This is my understanding of the death in the third degree. Here's a quote from Walter Leslie Wilmshurst, a remarkably competent English Mason, who said, "Hence, the third degree is that of mystical death, of which bodily death is taken as figurative. In all the mystery systems of the past will be found this degree of mystical death as an outstanding and essential feature prior to the final stage of perfection and regeneration. Now, through the mystical death, one's self is raised to a level of a higher level of consciousness, which I understand to be the spirit. And from that level of consciousness, the level of the spirit, one can experience the divine presence. The spirit is a level of creativity. The working tools of the Master Mason are tools of creativity. The pencil, the skirt, and the compasses. I see the pencil as wisdom, the skirt as understanding, which constrains wisdom, and the compasses, an instrument of proportion that holds them in balance. Here, on this third degree tracing board, across the top, one can see the three working tools of the Master Mason. Having reached this level, one travels west to spread the brotherly love and wisdom and to propagate the knowledge that he has gained. In this way, the third degree describes the achievement of the goal held by the Renaissance philosophers, the experience of the divine presence. The interior journey can take many, many years. By doing it, one learns a great deal about oneself. One learns that the Lord is in his holy temple, and you are the temple. When you know that, you know enough.